Okay, we're continuing with the Holy Grail of Wisdom quotes by me, Pete Rogers, in alphabetical order. First, Anais Nin. She's an Asian lady writer. She said, the role of a writer is not to say what we all can say, but what we are unable to say. Yeah, there it is. Okay, somebody who tells the truth that everyone else is sort of either not able to tell, doesn't know it, or is scared to say it. That's useful. Okay, just being a BS artist, saying coffee is good for sleep. That'll get you interviewed on the circuit, but it doesn't make what you're saying of lasting value. Okay? Our next quote by Anis Rand. Life shrinks or expands in proportion to one's courage. Yeah, you have to decide how big you want to go with your life because, you make more money. It's easier if you don't do anything big, but at the same time, then you're disappointed in yourself. Next one. One writes because one has to create a world in which one can live. Yeah, it's a little bit like, Jane Austen, Pride and Prejudice. The book and the story and all the romance was the sort of opposite of her own lonely life. All my things telling you about how the great Western civilization is a polar opposite of Western civilization being rapidly destroyed around us. And the public being so stupid they don't even know it and they don't care. It's sad. So as long as I'm alive, I'll try to share it with people. Her next quote, you cannot save people, you can only love them. And that's true too. When I was young, there were people I think I could have saved, but I didn't have the knowledge. And now there's a lot of people I care about and even love, and they just don't have the mental oomph to just turn themselves around. I've seen a lot of people just crash and burn. But, there's a lot of people who I have been able to save, so I'm glad for that. You do the best you can. Okay, the next person is Robert Nisbet. Okay, he was a sociologist at UC Berkeley, and he said some good things. And it sounds to me like his heart's in the right place, but you'll see what comes out of his quote. So here's his first quote. Marxism, like all totalitarian movements in our century, must be seen as a kind of secular pattern of redemption. Yeah, basically it pushes itself as if it were a religion, the religion of atheism. Okay, Nisbet continues, designed to bring hope and fulfillment to those who feel alienated, frustrated, and excluded from what they regard as a rightful place in the community. Okay, that brings to mind the term called the coalition of the fringes. So basically the billionaires saw that the only obstacle to bringing back slavery, all the other ethnic groups are too small, too few, too stupid, atheistic enough that they're corrupt, you can just pay them off. So they basically saw there is only one group of people in the whole world that has the power to stop the return of slavery, and that is the white Christian man. So therefore they said we must target him. And then they said, well, if we target him, how can we do this? We need support. How can we get support? Well, we'll just have to demonize him, to scapegoat him, say everything about him is bad, and then stir up all the people who are jealous of him or feel disempowered by him. For example, the white Christian woman. Just tell her that husbands are assholes, tell them that they're patriarchal misogynists, and then make his women hate him, turn them against him with feminism, which is really Satanism. Okay, we'll do that. Tell the blacks all the problems are the fault of whitey, okay? Don't remind them that poverty and crime and cruelty is much worse and slavery continues in Africa. Just tell them all their problems are because of whitey. Tell the Hispanics all their problems are because of whitey. Tell everyone, the Asians, all their problems are because of whitey. Make them all hate him, okay? Because if they can all hate him and destroy him, then we can bring back slavery. Because once he's out of the way, no one else can resist communism, which is modern slavery. And that's true. That's why that's being done. That's why you have corporations like McKinsey Corporation who have executive training for promotion, but no white men are allowed to attend. Okay? That's why everyone is a victim. Oh, she's a victim because she's a female. Oh, he's a victim because he's a homosexual. Oh, he's a victim because he's a transsexual. Oh, he's a victim because he's a minority of some sort. Okay? Everyone is a victim except the white Christian male. The woman, the white Christian female even, she's a victim too. She's a victim of misogyny, of sexism, of chauvinism, of everything. Everyone is a victim because everyone must be turned against him. Because if everyone is turned against him, he will be destroyed. And once he's destroyed, there will be no one to speak up for freedom. Because all the other ethnic groups, they're too weak, or they're too easy to control, or they're corrupt, you can pay them off, or they're stupid, or whatever the reason. But as far as the billionaires are concerned, there is no one else on the earth that really matters. As long as the white Christian man is destroyed, Slavery will be imposed. And then the population will be reduced. They'll probably keep, some females around just as sex toys, but this is where it's going. I mean, it's obvious. This has been in writing for a long time. The things I'm saying are not any of my own ideas. All of this stuff, I read about it decades ago, and I'm like, holy crap, it's happening. And it's happening, obviously, to anybody who has a brain and reads. Let us continue with Robert Nisbet's quote about totalitarianism. He says, "In its promise of unity and belonging lies much of the magic of totalitarian mystery, miracle, and authority." Those three lines, mystery, miracle, and authority, that comes from Brothers Karamazov, the chapter about the Grand Inquisitor, saying that the real people don't want to be Christians. They don't want to devote themselves to a life where they try to emulate Christ and the saints and whatnot. They just want a little mystery and authority. They don't care about truth. They're too lazy to pursue the truth. They simply want to see authority and to bow down to it with its mystery and its miracles, okay? That's what they want, okay? Bertrand Russell has not exaggerated, now this is Nisbet again, has not exaggerated in summing up the present significance of Marxism somewhat as follows: that dialectical materialism is God, Marx the Messiah, Lenin and Stalin the apostles, the proletariat the elect, the Communist Party as the church, Moscow the seat of the church, the Bolshevik Revolution as the second coming, the punishment of capitalism as hell, and Trotsky as the devil, and the communist commonwealth as kingdom come. And that's how stupid people are. Communism wants to centralize everything, because through centralization, a very small number of people can control a very large number of people, okay? It runs on hatred. It needs atheism because atheism allows it to do incredible cruelty, okay? With atheism, you dehumanize all the people, so you can get one person to do cruel things to another person very easily, okay? It's kind of amazing how easily they get that. And nowadays, too, it's even worse because they've learned from what happened in the Philippines. What happened in the Philippines is Marcos wanted his soldiers to just start shooting the population. And they said, no, they're Christians and we are Christians. We're not going to do that to them, okay? So what's going to happen in the future is they're just going to bring in people from other countries. For example, look at in Ireland, okay? In Ireland, the Irish police did not want to brutalize the Irish people. So what do? They hire people from like Pakistan. They'll hire Muslims from Pakistan and they'll say, beat the shit out of this Irish Catholic. And the guy will go, yes, sir. Okay, and he'll do it. And you're going to see that in all these other places. They're going to bring in people from other places and use them to brutalize the native population. It's pretty standard stuff, okay? Let's see, what's next? Okay, that's pretty much the end of that quote. Okay, here's the next quote by Robert Nisbet. "Insight into the nature of the totalitarian mind, complete with its passion for centralization." We talked about centralization, so the few can control the many. "And uniformity, wants everything standardized for rationalist extirpation of tradition." It has to get rid of tradition. The reason why they rewrite all the history books is because they have to make the public stupid. If the public has a brain and says, gee, we were a lot better off in the past. The past was more noble, more good, more kind, more thoughtful, more true, more beautiful. They might not go along with all the BS of the totalitarian. So they erase the past and try to act like their totalitarian thing is an improvement. And the young people don't know any better because they don't know what happened in the past. That's why they got rid of the Greeks from the teaching of the school. That's why they got rid of the Bible from the teaching of the school. Because somebody who's read about the ancient Greeks and who's read the Bible, they're like, wow, this is magnificent. Why would I want this modern crap? Okay, when you see Christian art, you puke when you see modern art. It's fake. Okay, so they don't want people to know the true history. Okay, then he says, insight into the absolute moralism of totalitarianism and the way it will extend when necessary to terror was not easy to come by in the late 1700s, and we owe Edmund Burke much for this insight. Okay, so what he's talking about there was initially with the French Rev from 1789 to 1794, a lot of people were enthusiastic about it. People like, Thomas Paine, the American semi-patriot, he's an atheist jerk, but still, he was enthusiastic about it. William Wordsworth, the great English poet, he was over there in France and enthusiastic about it. He barely escaped with his life, okay? And it wasn't until much later that people came to realize how evil it really was. It was based on hatred and atheism. It's sort of like a miniature version of the Soviet, Bolshevik Revolution, 1917, 1918 times. Okay, and so Nisbet was pointing out that Edmund Burke, the Irish guy who was in England's parliament, had the brains and the guts to say, look, this French Rev thing is bad. It is only going to get worse. And he is right. He was correct. Okay, I'm going to come back to one more quote in this section from Edmund Burke that's highly valuable, but that's what people can't seem to see today because they don't know history. That's why you got to know history, because you can see what's coming, you can see what's happening. You always want God above, because then that puts some control on the ruler. You always want checks and balances, because when men have total power, they behave very badly. All you got to do is, that's why everybody should study ancient Rome. When you see how these Roman rulers behaved, you see that's how any, there's going to be some good rulers. You know, Marcus Aurelius was decent. There were a few other emperors who were decent, you know, but you'll see that a lot of them, when they're given total power, they just become very evil. All right, and they do things that are just unbelievably evil. All right, things like insisting on a different concubine every single day of the year, and they get it. Okay, and they'll insist on a lot of terrible things. If they want to sleep with a girl, they'll just kill her family and make her a sex slave. Okay, that's what it was like in ancient Rome when the emperor had total power. They call that a pearl hunt, to just do that. Okay. All right, so because the reason I say that, in my experience, most of the average stupid American, they've gone to a public school, and they got this weird idea in their mind that society likes them. And you may say that's no big deal. It is a big deal, because if you think society likes you, then you become a chump. Okay, if you have a brain in your head, you say to yourself, why is our water poisoned with rat poison, fluoride, and with aluminum, a major off-the-charts powerful neurotoxin? Why is that? And with all these estrogenic chemicals, and with TCE and PCE and all this other stuff? Is that because somebody likes us? Why is our sky, our air poisoned? Why is our food poisoned? Okay, so if you have a brain in your head and you say, gee, these things are not consistent with the system loves me, then you'll at least have the, you know, the motivation to read a little bit about food and water and give yourself a chance to filter your water, be a little more careful about your food. There's no guarantees, but at least you got a chance. Whereas the average stupid pro has no chance, man. Just like, show me a pro and I'll show you, you know, cognitive decline by 55 and other disasters. Okay, let's continue here. The next quote from Robert Nisbet. The enemy becomes not only the ready scapegoat for all ordinary dislikes and frustrations, he becomes a symbol of total evil against which the forces of good may mobilize themselves into a militant community. And that's like Solzhenitsyn had said. The average stupid person, they need an ideology, and the ideology comes from atheism, that there is no God, life has no meaning. But as long as you help us to destroy the white Christian man, then you're doing something good. So the average moronic person with no sense, no judgment, they'll go, oh, then I'll help destroy Whitey. That way I can do something good. And all of a sudden, Whitey's gone. And now, you know, the totalitarian says, okay, now I got all you weak, miserable chumps, and it's time to deal with you. Okay? And oh, it's not going to be nice when that time comes. There's going to be no one that can stand up for freedom when that time comes. It's inevitable. It's obvious. Okay. If you read history, just read a little bit of history, and you will see this is what happens like almost every single time. The city is sacked. Okay, the men are all killed. The women, you know, the young pretty ones are RAPED. The rest of them are sold into slavery or bumped off. Okay, that's it. The women never save anything. The women never have any significant defense of anything, okay? They talk a lot, but they never defend or fix anything. It's sad, but that's true. Let's be realistic. So all this stuff of trying to say men and women are equal and then making the women hate the men, it dramatically lowered the population. The more you educate a woman, the less babies she has. The more you promote feminism and tell her how bad men are and how great abortion is, the less babies she has. And then she ends up 40 plus, she can't get a man, and she has no kids, and she's all sad and lonely, but it's a little bit too late then, okay? Just turn on your internet. You'll see all these women crying and wailing because they were feminists when they were young, and they never had any kids, and they're all sad and they're lonely, and now no man wants them, and they just got a couple cats, okay? That's very common. That was intentional. That was done to reduce the population. Okay, let's see what comes next. Yeah, so that's what I meant by coalition of the fringes, to turn everybody against the white Christian man. So once he's destroyed, slavery could be brought in to the public sphere. That's the game plan. Okay, just got a couple more quotes by Robert Nisbet. We're almost done on him. He says, man's alienation from man must lead in time to man's alienation from God. Okay, and that's like Arnold Toynbee, the English historian. He said, the brotherhood of man is dependent on the fatherhood of Christ. Okay, the fatherhood of God. If you don't have God the Father, then mankind is not brothers. And if mankind is not brothers, then whoever is the powerful ruler will just do whatever they want. Okay, that's what's coming. All right, it's rather obvious. Okay, and you don't need all that religious stuff, but you should have Christian ethics. Basically, man was created in the image of God, like the Bible, Genesis. Man's created in the image of God, therefore he's part divine. Therefore, we should not abuse him. Okay, he's entitled to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, privacy, free speech, etc. Okay, and now he talks about literature. He says, literature nowadays is not about the free individual, but the lost individual. It's not about independence, but isolation. Not self-discovery, but self-obsession. Not to conquer, but to be conquered. These are the major states of mind in contemporary imaginative literature. Okay, so where's he going with that? He's really talking about the difference between the Romantic Manifesto of Ayn Rand, where she talked about romantic realism as a great form of literature, what she liked, versus what she called this modern form of naturalism. And so he's describing it from another point of view, but they're saying exactly the same thing. That the old literature was sort of volitional, heroic, that man is faced with difficulties and he figures out how to overcome his obstacles. And that's what all the greatest novels of all time are like, you know. Les Miserables, Jean Valjean overcomes his difficulties, okay? Christmas Carol, Scrooge overcomes his psychological difficulties and becomes a better man and saves Tiny Tim, okay? Brothers Karamazov, where Alyosha shows you the path to navigate life. Quo Vadis, where the Christians show how one should live. Okay, all of that is man navigating the world to live a better life, and that's good, versus the modern novels. You know, a lot of the stuff that came out in the after World War I is just sort of disgusting. Like James Joyce, they proclaim him as this great writer. He's an alcoholic jerk getting drunk all the time. You know, Ulysses is unreadable. It's this crazy nonsense, okay? And then they proclaim these other psychotic, stupid females like Sylvia Plath, suicide. Oh, she's a great writer. No, she's an idiot who killed herself. Then they proclaim, what's his name? Who's the other one? The other lady, Virginia Woolf. She's always trying to kill herself, commit suicide. She's not a good role model for kids. She shouldn't be taught to, high school and college students. She should be, some nut job you can maybe look at later for her experiments with punctuation or something. But she has nothing to say, no moral message that one would want to emulate. I like heroic people that had difficulties and overcame them. I could learn from them. I don't want to read the opinion of some psychotic person who does those things, okay? All right, let's see. Now he's continuing here. He says, a sense of the past is far more basic to the maintenance of freedom than is hope for the future. The past is concrete and real, whereas the future is necessarily amorphous and is more easily guided by those who can manipulate human actions and beliefs. Yeah, the past is your foundation. You can stand by that like a rock, and you should honor your ancestors. And that unifies the populations. Anybody can promote BS for the future. Okay, here's Robert Nisbet. He's going to bring up Edmund Burke again. Society, Edmund Burke wrote in a celebrated line, is a partnership of the dead, the living, and the unborn. If you mutilate the roots of society and tradition, the result must inevitably be the isolation of the generation from its heritage, the isolation of individuals from their fellow men, and the creation of sprawling, faceless masses. Yeah, that's what's happened to the West, and USA in particular. Once you erase the past, people don't even know who they are. And that's what's happened to our young generation. They're all mixed up. The solution is learn about your heritage. It's all sitting right here. It's all for free on my channel and a whole bunch of other good YouTube channels. You don't even have to pay any money. You don't even have to buy a book. It's all on the internet. Don't get me wrong. Books are great to have and read, but you can learn it from the internet. It's nice to have a book in your bathroom. You don't want to be listening to this in your bathroom, okay? You can listen to an audiobook in your car. You get through tons of books if you do it that way. All right, that's it for Robert Nisbet, the sociologist. We just have one last quote here from Charles Norton, and he's a bit of a BS artist, but he had a good quote here. He said, a knowledge of the Greek thought and life and of the arts in which the Greeks expressed their thought and sentiment is essential to high culture. A man may know everything else, but without this knowledge he remains ignorant of his best intellectual and moral achievements of his own race. Yeah, so basically what he's saying here is if you don't know the ancient Greeks, then you're a barbarian. Okay, you might be the greatest computer programmer in the world, but in terms of history and culture, if you don't know the ancient Greeks, you're a barbarian. Here's Goethe, the great German. He said, "He who cannot draw on 3,000 years of history is living from hand to mouth." The Greeks are where it's at. The ancient Greeks, they're the first Westerners. They are the ones who started what we would call Western civilization. Okay, and of course there's the Old Testament and the Bible and all that, but it's the ancient Greeks that had that sense of freedom and all this great stuff. And people talk about the Catholic Church comes from the Old Testament, but the Catholic Church comes a lot from the ancient Greeks, and that's not well understood, but if you think about it, it's obvious. The Catholic Church sort of came out of Rome, all right? And it began in Rome, and it continued through the Roman Empire. And Catholic Church didn't just take over with Constantine, like in 312 AD. The Catholic Church coexisted with paganism, the Greek and Roman religions, for about 500 years. It was still going on into the 500s AD. Paganism was still going relatively strong. So the reason I tell you that is it had to coexist with paganism for a long time, and that's part of the open-mindedness of Catholicism. It sort of gradually took over the celebration days, feast days, and holidays of paganism. In a sense, I think that's a good thing because it's very syncretic. Syncretic means to absorb and learn from the cultures that have gone before you and to be open-minded, and Catholicism is like that. And so the church was an establishment anyways, also for hundreds of years before the Bible was even consolidated. Okay, so what I'm trying to say is the Catholic Church is with Christ, and it's from before the Bible. Because then Luther comes along 1,500 years later, 1517, and says, no, only the Bible matters, and only the books I want in the Bible. Tosses out the book of James and this other stuff, and then he basically just emphasizes, do as I say or you're going to burn in hell. And it's like, screw you. We want to enjoy our life. We want to enjoy life on earth. We don't want to just do what we have to because you say so, or we won't go to heaven. And so Catholicism is much more livable. It's much more about enjoying life in community than just this Bible-thumping, do what I say, you're going to burn in hell stuff that turns people off. There's no mystery about the message of Christ. Be nice to people, help each other, forgive each other, and get along. That's a good message. Anyways, just one last quote here by Percy Bysshe Shelley. He's a romantic poet from the early 1800s in England, and he said, "We are all Greeks. Our literature, our religion, ours have their root in Greece. But for Greece, we might still be savages and idolaters. The period between the birth of Pericles and the death of Aristotle is the most memorable of any history in any country of the world." Okay, that's actually true. Ancient Greeks, there's nothing like them. Anyways, I hope you found that helpful.